given that we all sort of feel this intensity right now, I think it's, it's everything from cases ramping back up to back to school to just people being, who had been in other positions coming back to their work. It's just a crazy time. So thanks for still prioritizing this. I know impact is not really the top priority when you've got so many other fires to put out. So it really means a lot to us and to the whole group that you did join today. We're gonna go have a really packed day today because Mark is covering 2 modules. He's covering, well, 2 topics in this module. It's both shifting narratives and nudging systems. So we really want to give enough time to cover both. So we're just going to jump right in. Mark, if you want to go to the next slide.
Yep, thank you. Oh, sorry, let me.
So if you want to ask a question, feel free to just put one in the chat or unmute yourself. And so we're on module 4. Just to give you a sort of a heads up of the next couple of modules, we have one more with Mark in October, and then in November, Lisa Adagala from Tamarack will be doing a module on communicating results. And next month, we'll be sharing a whole host of impact reports for you to look at and get inspiration from as you start to think about how you might put together an impact report. And then Lisa will be helping you to kind of pull everything together from what you've learned into this course and talk about how you could actually visually put together a report yourself for the work you're doing. So that's kind of the schedule for the upcoming months. Next slide. So just to recap, last month we talked about sort of how to monitor your context and your capacity, your own capacity building to do this work. And if you haven't had a chance to do the workbook yet, no problem. This is a course that you can do at your own pace. Those materials are not going away. So just get to it when you can, and you don't have to do every exercise, just the ones that are ones that seem relevant for you in your work. And we'll have time at the end today for if you have questions for Mark around some of the workbook exercise. We'll hold that for the end, but I just want to make sure we have time to get through the content. So we'll just go ahead to you, Mark, now and start module 4.
Great, thanks, Christine. Hi, everyone again. Just to start off, wanted to confirm that one of the things I'm appreciating about this version of trying to talk about how to share results in our work is because we have such short sessions once a month and everyone's busy, it really forces us to be as elegantly simple about these topics as we can, knowing that when you apply them, things complexify a bit. So, but we have made a choice to tell an elegantly simple story, knowing that it complexifies in your world, rather than trying to show you a complex story, right? That tries to be useful in every different context. So we are going to be renewing that commitment to finding elegant simplicity in trying to communicate stories, where the framework that we're using, if you remember everyone, is this multi-level perspective again, because what we're saying is in order to get an impact, however you frame that, connections, relationships, community well-being, the pathway to that is multiple levels of outcomes at different scales. So when you tell a story about impact, tell all the intermediate things that were required in order to get that impact. That's part of the communication challenge. And if we can do it in a narrative format, and we're playing around with storyboards. Today, we're going to zone in quickly, as Christine noted, on 2 things, shifting awareness and culture, and then nudging systems. And each of them deserves its own time period, but I think we can do both fairly quickly. And for each of them, we're gonna build on a very simple framework developed by someone else, and we're gonna use for our own purposes. And if you like these frameworks, you can go deeper onto them, and Christine also has them simplified version captured in the workbook for you as well. But the first one is from the Center for Evaluation Innovation that does a lot of stuff around evaluating policy change and awareness building change. And look how nice and simple this thing is. This actually is based on the idea that there are 3 categories of audiences when you're trying to get something done. The public, i.e. local residents, right? In general, we all understand the public. key influencers of a specific idea. Let's say you're dealing with education. You might be having as influencers a local parent-teacher council, or you might have a teachers association or something. And then decision makers, people who are on the issue that we're interested in, safety, education, economic development, people who actually make decisions. Those could be policymakers, businesses, people who have formal authority. So they make these distinctions, and they say when we're trying to engage them, we actually go through a process of getting them aware of an issue, trying to build their will to do something about it, which is sort of mysterious, and then encouraging them to act in a way that aligns with wherever we want to go, i.e., let's save the parrots in St. Lucia. So here's just a real quick summary of that. Different changes for different audiences. I think that makes a lot of sense. And this framework does a real nice job of describing that. And they actually go into something that I don't want to explain to you, but I want to let you know that we all know. It's unbelievably mysterious about how to build, get people to have will to build communities. How to get people to care about a community. And so some of the things that they talk about in this magic middle is it is influenced by opinions of issues. Am I concerned? Remember that my little story about trying to deal with drug deals in the park in front of our house, right? The will to do that is a combination of anything. It's highly salient to me, the issue. It was right in front of my house. We got kids. It's not an abstract idea somewhere else. It's in front of my house. It happened pretty frequently. I have my own opinion about what shaped my action. My opinion is I'm kind of libertarian around those issues. It doesn't matter to me what you do, but do it in your own home, right? So that's my opinion that shifted my will to do something with them. And then my capacity or my perceived capacity to act, my sense of agency. We don't have to go into this, folks. We're just knowing that this building awareness to something and getting someone to act, there's a little bit of mystery about how that happens. It's at least a combination of these things. But if you look at the right-hand side here, you may throw in your own little knowledge there. What are the different ways to build for different audiences awareness, will, and action? It's all over the place. I would argue that when we did the drug deal stuff, me and a bunch of neighbors to act, we mostly focused on community mobilization on the action side, right? That was one way of doing it. Now, let's take a look at the Parative story. We all remember that, hopefully remember that Parative in St. Lucia. Remember they built that identity campaign. They had to build the identity campaign in St. Lucia to save the parrots because the first public policy package hit a brick wall. No one was interested in it. So how do you get people interested in it? Well, they did this identity campaign. Remember what they did? Jaquette, the parrot on buses, on radio programs, contests, meeting people. And they were working with public education in schools, influencers, with radio personalities, etc., with media advocacy, public will campaigns. They were all over the place. They probably didn't use this matrix, everyone. They just did what was intuitively obvious. But when they were communicating the story, they could have easily have used a matrix like this to say, here's who we engaged and how. So if you're trying to tell the story of, damn it, we want people to build a safer neighborhood or something, let me tell you about all the building awareness activities that we had to do to get people to move. So in that case, the Parative story can easily be mapped against this framework. And the question for you, and Christine, I think we have time. Can you automatically throw people into groups, or should we do this? I can't see how many people we have today. How many do we have?
We have 8 people on the call.
Oh, yeah, let's do that. Well, why don't we just do this? To what extent could you easily identify in your own deepening community work 3 audiences that you would like to influence and how you might shift their awareness? So Christine, I'll let you curate this. Do we have time to just put people into small groups for 5 minutes, or do we want to do this in plenary?
Either way works. I can put people into 2 groups. So does everyone have the question? Do you want to just repeat it one more time, Mark?
Yeah, when you have this, when they go into groups, they won't see this, will they? Let's do it in plenary. Sorry, Christine, I didn't think this out very well.
Okay.
So folks, why don't you just volunteer something? In fact, I'm just going to pick on Angie because I know Angie enough to pick on her. Angie, when you're thinking about all the work, community building, your work you're doing in St. Albert, can you plot some audiences on here, and could you plot how you're trying to engage them to build their awareness?
Well, I wrote down really quickly because I thought we were going to move into groups. So I wrote my 3 groups. I think that the 3 audiences for sure are public residents, but also we have some changes happening just within our municipality. So leadership, I need to engage and, try to promote some awareness with leadership and our city council.
Who's your, when you say leadership, Angie, break that down a bit more. Who is that?
Well, like our city manager and our director. We don't actually have a director now, so we're sort of in that place where, do people know what we do anymore?
Yeah.
So in order to keep doing what we need, we do, I need to somehow get some information out there again to try to influence that.
And so maybe just muse on your the city leadership. How might you engage them? Is it going to be one-on-one meetings?
Yes. Yeah. Well, I mean, it's delicate sometimes, but definitely some one-on-one stuff. My current acting director is looking to have an audience with council at some point where we can explain what neighborhood development is about and what our goals and hopes are. So, and I know they buy in, it's just not on their radar right now. So you have to find the right timing to do that, but could be some of that as well.
Yeah. Awesome, Angie. Thank you.
Yeah.
Anyone else just want to share, like if actually share if you think this is a helpful tool that you might use immediately after, like throw up your hand and saying, oh, here's how I would already plot this using this simple framework. Just throw up your hand and then we'll ask you just to riff on it. Go ahead, Emily. Thanks.
I think seeing it in this way and the neighborhood work in this way makes it a little bit easier to follow through. Like in the awareness piece, I think I'm doing some of these activities, but it's not aligned. So if I think about it, and I think like Heather and I have talked about in our one-on-one meetings with my project, I've thought about the audience pieces, right? The residents, the city staff, the service providers, like who's in our neighborhood and who's working here already. But the will piece is, I think, where I'm stuck. The awareness piece, like that seems fairly intuitive a little bit.
Yeah.
But finding some of those cheerleaders to help us with the will, that I don't have to do it all, right? The audiences will help you move through the other pieces too. So I think it's a good way too to explain it to others as we work through the project as well, the different levels.
And again, you're reiterating the mystery of will. I mean, the example I use all the time is I'm highly aware that I'm not supposed to be making sandwiches at 10 p.m. Like, I'm really aware of that. I have been told by multiple people multiple times, I'm hyper aware, but I have not been able to crack the will. Like, that's not true. Leanne goes, what are you thinking about? She thinks I'm thinking about nothing. And here's what's going on in my head. Mark, you don't need a sandwich. You just had lunch. You just had supper. Mark, it's 10 o'clock at night. Your body can't renovate that. Mark, you worked hard today. You deserve a sandwich. A sandwich would be really good watching this TV show. So we know that awareness does not translate into action.
Yeah.
In fact, if you read stuff on poverty reduction, which I'm a bit more familiar with, how many of you have run a poverty simulation? Yeah, poverty simulations, the research on this is good. The poverty simulation does increase awareness. There've been a number of studies on this, but it generates very weak changes in action. And the reason is not because the poverty simulation is not good. It is good, it's just not enough. Right? You need a poverty simulation plus something else. How do you get that crowd that's now sensitized and normalized? And how do you adjust what kind of campaigns or processes do you to pull them through that will section that is so mysterious? And that's a bit of work, as you noted, Emily. Good. Any reflections on this? I mean, lots of variations on this, Heather.
I got two things that come to mind. My one question is, when you look at this, I think of it kind of as a scale. So would it be wrong of me just to work on public and awareness and just solely focus in on that piece? Or is it better, because you say up to 3 key audiences, is it better to do, the public, the influence and decision makers kind of all at the same time? And my other thinking or thought is, you know, awareness is the easiest part, but yet it's also the most fundamental part. And it's when we think something's easy, we skim through it without really giving a lot of thought to it. So awareness is more than just telling somebody or letting somebody be more aware of that this issue is important. Awareness is also giving them the tools so that they can then help build the will. So awareness, we just think it's good enough that people know that this is an issue. Awareness is also giving them the tools so that they can help build the will.
Yeah. I think you asked good strategy questions, Heather. Would you agree? I think every one of us faces those strategy on climate change. People are aware of climate change. We're having a rough time doing something about it, right? And because people don't understand the pathway sometimes. Maybe Heather, you know what? Hey, let's answer that in a way that I think all of you would answer. And you know what the answer is? It depends. Right? So if you think you have enough power to do it all and it's high stakes enough, probably we should be busy all over the map and saying, well, who's doing what and where do I add crazy value? You might say, Heather, oh, so-and-so's already building awareness, so we should focus on will. Or they're focusing on will, but what we need is more awareness. So you're always making these strategic choices. In the case of St. Lucia, let's just go back, they felt they had to hit schools, media, and policymakers concurrently. Now, whether they're right or not, I don't know, but that was their assessment back then, or they either had that strategy or that strategy emerged. I think everyone, you would agree that probably it depends, right? How busy do you get, right? What is required in your neighborhood? Who else is doing what? How much power do you have? How much capacity, I should say. Yeah.
I just want to add, like what you just said, Heather, made me think about the same thing, except in the will section, because during COVID, when I had to step back, I did observe a lot of neighbors helping each other and doing this good work that I hoped and wanted them to do. And, you know, that's exactly what we were hoping would happen. But now it's like, oh, okay, so now the will's there. I feel like I have to I need to give them tools to do more action around it. And I don't want to miss that opportunity. So it's interesting to look at it this way.
Good example. Another example, by the way, of navigating landscape, Angie. You know, we do stuff and then the context shifts on us like COVID, and then we have to do something different. Well, folks, we're playing with this. There is the resource there. And again, as Christine mentioned, we've got to do 2 sections here. So here is a one tool that you'll have a link to, the Center for Evaluation Innovation, which is meant for advocacy, but it's good, and it's in general good for communication. And anyone who's been involved in communication knows we're just touching on the art and science of communication, but there is an evaluation implication to this, including, and you'll see more of this in the workbook, and it's in the document itself. What specific outcomes do we expect to see? What indicators and methods might we use to track these results? So that's in the workbook, and we've actually tried to summarize it in, again, with this level 1, 2, and 3 format as an example. Again, where level 1 is, look, I barely got time to breathe, never mind evaluate. So what's the basic I should do? And then level 3 is, you know, I won the lottery and all I get to do for now on for the rest of my life is evaluate stuff. So let's go as far as we can. So level 1 simply could be identify your audience and count the number of people engaged by awareness activities and group. So Angie, I talked to 3 senior managers and 46 residents, and you know, very basic output oriented stuff. And the technique would depend on your activity, right? You could easily do that. Level 2 is to assess the change of in the target group's awareness and their possibility of their willingness to ask simply by talking to them or observing their actions. Angie, you had a meeting with city manager before they said, I don't want to do this. And after they said, I want to do this, you know, boom, there you go. So to kind of just a before and after kind of thing. And the third level is related to that is simply tracking actions taken. People were engaged, etc., and what happened at the top level of the coin. And I'm going to give you an example of that with some tools right away, but this roughly gives you a sense of the level of effort. Who did we talk to? Number 1. Number 2, did it shift their awareness? Number 3, and did they act? Level 1, 2, and 3. Now, if we go back to the parrot story, remember one of the audiences was getting to kids in junior high. Why? To tell them that this was their national parrot. So how would we go about doing that using these level 1, 2, and 3s? Well, oops, sorry guys, I'm trying to move my thing. So you could easily count the number of kids engaged by awareness activities. 200 kids from 6 neighborhood schools participated in a field trip to learn more about St. Lucian's National Bird Project. Level 2, we did a little follow-up survey, and the majority of students reported that their awareness have shifted, and we used some kind of crazy Likert scale. This is all made up, by the way, but I keep pretending that I was there. And that they might be interested in taking action. Much like the poverty simulation follow-ups, by the way, people go to a poverty simulation, they say, I love the workshop. Are you more likely to do something? Probably. At level 3, just track what happened post activity, and we don't have to do a randomized control trial to know that these kids in one of the classes created a fundraiser to contribute to a new bird sanctuary. So again, level 1, 2, and 3, elegantly simple. It complexifies like crazy when you're actually doing your stuff. There's a lot of it depends here, but here's an example of that. I'm just going to stop there, see if there's any burning questions about the simplicity of this framework and its implications for evaluation at level 1, 2, and 3. And Heather and Christine, if you wanted to add anything. Heather Wowen, I can't see Christine, I can't see your.
I'm here, I'm just waiting for people to jump in and ask questions.
Okay. Oh, we have someone, is it Brandon?
Could be.
Yeah, welcome, Brandon.
Welcome, Brandon.
Hey, Mark.
Okay, well, Christine, weigh in if anything, because then if not, we'll move to part B, which is then looking at another framework to talk about systems, which is a bit more complicated.
Are you aware of any tools that measure will? That seems to be the hardest part to measure. I'm just wondering, like, there's a lot of surveys that measure and tools that measure awareness and actions, but what's out there to measure will?
It's a good question. I've never seen a body of practice that's meant to measure will. The only thing I've seen come close to something like this, maybe we can send it out. Have any of you heard of something called COM-B? No, it's a bit geeky. And what it is here's my understanding of it. I could have this wrong, but the rough plot line is we're all looking for behavior change of some sort, right? Wear masks, recycle, try not to just watch your language around issues of equity, etc. We want behavior change. And what the COM-B model says is if you want to get behavior change, you have to focus in on 3 different drivers of behavior change. M, motivation, opportunity, and capacity. And so in a way, it's similar. You were talking, Christina, someone was talking earlier, Angie, about action. How do you create opportunities for action, build the capacity to do that, and build motivation? And COM-B is actually a summary of 86 behavior change theories. And so in the COM-B world, you can imagine it's a world now, right? Psychologists and everyone like it. There's an enormous amount of literature and tools. So one could, maybe we could do that as a follow-up, Christine, you and I, just bravely dip our feet into the COM-B world and see if something comes up, because there might be something there. But now that I chat about it, it's very similar to this framework, actually.
Yeah, I like that a lot. My other question is there a 5th component, or is it just 4 here? I'm not sure if there's a 5th one that's missing from this slide, or if it's just 4 that you were meant to put.
Oh, let me just see. Oh, might be a counting problem again. There might have been 4. You know what?
Okay.
Would will also be like those who go to council, so something's coming up, and those who actually go to council, would
Yes,
that be a measure of will? Because or you have street parties, and if it's not the same person organizing the street party, if it's 5 different people organizing street parties, there's a bit of a will there. But if it's the same person organizing the street party over and over and over again, I would say the will, it's a 1-person will, but you could see that you are increasing the will when others take on organizing street parties.
Yeah. I think so. I think it's all in the intent of the intervention. So have any of you watched Borgen on Netflix? It's a Danish political series. It's pretty interesting. It's about moderates and coalition parties in Denmark, but it's really like a very engaging West Wing. And that whole show, not whole show, a good chunk of that show is about the Will, Heather, right? How do you get the bloc to support this issue, and using media to press politicians into, it's mostly about politics, but you're right. I think when we talk about the technique, Christine, the methods, it may be more useful to talk about what methods might use if we use this will building technique, as Heather's suggesting. That the technique might help us be sharper about the method and the indicators.
That makes sense. Thanks.
Yeah, good. Okay, so we'll follow up with Con B. That's a good question, everyone. And if it is pretty geeky, but if you have time and energy to geek out, you'll enjoy it. Okay, we're going to go now to another framework. Many of you have seen this, maybe not everyone. When it comes to the issue of how do you change systems, we've always worked in systems, but it's only like the last 40 or 50 years that we've woken up to it again, and we've really woken up to it in the last 5, right? Because we're so desperate for better outcomes that we're asking deeper questions. The Foundation Strategy Group has done what I would call a simplified version of what Donella Meadows, a big ecologist from 40, 50 years ago, developed around 10 leverage points for change. I think this is, many of you would agree, a simplified version of that. And it's very popular and it's accessible. And so it's not, I would say it's not complete, but it's a good entry point to thinking about systems, simply because it's so accessible. What they argue is if you want to see a change in pattern of outcomes, you can work at these 3 different levels. The levels of structure change of policy, change of practice, or change the way resources are flowing. I think all of you could think about how that would apply to neighborhood change, right? Policy, we're worried about speeding cars, slow it down, right? Put in a new speed limit policy, introduce a new practice, have police sitting on the corner in their cars with the lights on, right? Angie, I remember that terrible story of the kid getting hit in St. Albert 3 or 4 years ago, or 5 years ago now. But have police sitting there in the cars, resource flows, invest more money in public education, et cetera. So that's the stuff actually I think we're quite good at, and we've normalized that. Like that's our go-to. They say you could go a little bit deeper though. You could talk about power dynamics and relationships and connections. Who has the power to decide how traffic is moved in that neighborhood, right? Maybe, and I actually don't have this position. Maybe actually, you know what? In the States, there's lots of examples of this. Maybe we have to build a citizen coalition to pressure urban planners to stop just thinking about how do you get the suburban drivers through my neighborhood faster. So you got to build a coalition to build that will. Relationships and connections, understanding, developing networks of people who mobilize together or connecting different policies and regulations. So they talk about connectivity in the system. And the last one, which they said is the deeper one, which I think we all understand. We all have paradigms, mental models, and narratives in our worldview that affect that keep these systems in place, quite frankly. So think about the paradigm behind the design of the suburb, everybody, which most of us live in. Boy, oh boy, is that ever not the root of endless issues in deepening community, right? How do you design a neighborhood to atomize people? Oh, you build a suburban neighborhood, right? That is based on where, anyways, we're going to get philosophical here, but you get the idea. Or education, racism, everything. It's mental models, narratives, and paradigms. So I think the reason people like this so much is they understand there's different levels of intervention, of change, and that behavior change typically requires a combination of those things being changed over time. And that outcomes are shifting policies, practices, resource flows. You can actually track that. I want to stop there. Christine and Heather, do you want to add anything to this? I don't know if we've used system stuff as much in deepening communities, but I don't think anyone will find this framework surprising.
This is where I struggle with deepening community and what are the systems are we trying to influence? And, you know, when we're trying to work in the citizen space, how can citizens influence the system if we don't quite know what the system is? So that I'm foggy on the system part.
Mm-hmm. But Heather, back to your comment earlier, does it not become more clear, meaning when the issue is clear? So again, going back to the drug stuff that I had, what are the systems related to people selling drugs in front of my house? Well, we were pretty superficial about it. We weren't talking about how to deal with, you know, with drugs in general. We were mostly saying, don't cut a deal in front of my house. So the systems weren't that many. The school system, minorly, the police we had to work with, right? The education system around SEPTED, crime prevention through environmental design. So a lot of this stuff becomes less abstract and the systems become sharper and clear depending on the issue. If it's drug deals, that's one thing. If it's about how do you build community, well, I think that one for sure is fuzzier because there's so many systems that influence how we build connections in community.
And maybe it's you know, maybe it is building community, but then it's asking that question, which system do we think is going to influence this the most? Maybe
Right.
it is the planning or the policy system in terms of how we plan, and then that's where you focus versus all the systems. I don't know, like that's the one I kind of, it's easier when you can actually narrow it down and be very clear. But when we're trying to neighborhood strategy, right? We're just building a neighborhood strategy, a citywide neighborhood strategy. That's huge.
Yeah.
And again, the question comes: can we focus on one system first, and then move to another system?
Well, let's open it up, folks. Like, Heather's got a good question. When you think about your neighborhood work, to what degree does this diagram reveal something to you about the nature of the work that you're doing? Does it help? Does it confuse?
I could take a stab at that. So I feel like, from my perspective, it makes sense. It's a pretty gentle framework to try to imagine where you might be positioned and where others might be positioned. I also recognize that I work for an institution, and by and large, I try to be a strong community advocate for people that aren't having their basic needs met. And so there's a unique, I think, perspective that we have in the work that we're doing at a neighborhood level in St. Catharines, where, you know, I think sometimes, to be honest with you, I've chatted with Heather about this over the years, it's easy to be critical of certain community development interventions because they seemingly require a degree of stability in one's life in order to fully participate. And so we're trying to navigate a bit of both. I see like Emily and I've had some offline conversations as well. How do we get people that have that stability involved in their community, full stop, any sort of involvement, just come out to the meeting, you know that there's we try to maintain a safe space for you to have your voice heard. But also know that at those meetings, there's going to be advocates that are going to say there's holes in the system, and the system is rather revealing these days for people that don't have adequate shelter, don't have access to running water and soap during a pandemic, et cetera, et cetera. And so are those conversations going to alienate some of those people that just want to come out and do some gardening or kind of get to know around what's happening in their community? It's such a mixed bag that at any given time, I think actually this downward facing triangle is a perfect sort of labyrinth for the different dynamics and relationships that we're always kind of navigating. And to a degree, I think that that's just going to exist in perpetuity. There's going to be groups that are going to say, hey, yeah, let's try to push now towards some policy advocacy, and who do we need to entertain in order to do that and to do that well and to have our voices heard. At the same time, let's keep pushing these transformative changes at the bottom level so that we can try to, work with that movable middle, as it were, and try to bring some people in towards being more compassionate and more sort of understanding as allies around the different struggles that exist. Because, this neighborhood is, for lack of better terms, complex. And life is complex, and all systems are complex. So to me, it makes sense, but I can also see, if you weren't strategic about it, just showing this to a random group of people that are kind of coming out to just learn around what's happening in their community, to be like, I don't have time for this intellectual sort of academic kind of stuff.
Yeah.
A lot of, maybe the roundabout way of saying is that, you know, knowledge translation and synthesizing this and presenting it to people
Absolutely.
in ways that they understand, that's where the magic happens.
Absolutely. You're right. As community development leads, you're always cultural interpreters. And I don't mean ethnocultural. That might be part of it. You're dealing with interpretation for different audiences. But Brandon, as you were sharing it that way, I actually just, I don't know how it happened. I just started thinking of Black Lives Matter and defund the police as a case study in this diagram, right? And illustrating that there's lots of things going on. I mean, the paradigm, the mental model stuff is institutional racism, right? That is a dynamic. It's complex as well. It's debated, etc. But we know we're talking about that zone for sure. And the hitting the streets is clearly power dynamics that have influenced, right? The number of people who are taking this seriously. So a lot of that stuff is larger social stuff, but that dynamic exists in the neighborhood. And I don't know if Canadian neighborhoods experiencing that much, but you can sure find 150 American neighborhoods dealing with this dynamic, with this triangle in their neighborhood. So you're right. It's this is a thinking tool that may or may not be useful for others, but it simply makes explicit the kind of factors involved in a discussion of systems change. And I think it says there's multiple types of changes that probably have to happen over time to see deep and durable impact. By the way, Brandon, you know, I like what you said, because this is possibly the simplest systems change thing I've ever seen. And it's still too geeky for people, for some of the people we work with. So boy, oh boy, you're really right about having to curate this.
Well, and you're right in applying a tangible sort of cause or project or topic to it. It makes it much clearer around, you know, the current status.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How many of you have seen this framework before, by the way? It's got quite a lot of traction. Like, I was just in Australia before COVID, and everyone's got this on their wall. It's really amazing. Well, let's just go a little bit further then. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, I just wanted to add, Mark. One thing I just wanted to point out with this framework is that the deeper you go in the triangle, yeah, the more transform. I mean, it says that they're transformative, but I think that we get scared to work deeper down in the triangle because it's harder to do that work. It's easy to do the policies and the resource flows, but I think ABCD can really help, because that's all about shifting the mental model. It's all about shifting away from institutions towards community and helping people shift where they're putting their power and their expectation of who should do the work. So I feel like ABCD is really a perfect marriage with this model, because it speaks to also the relationships and connections piece of, you know, connecting and harnessing gifts and shifting power dynamics. So I like using these two tools together.
Actually, you know what? That Christine, that's worth a webinar and some thinking work with the deepening community work, applying this framework to ABCD. You know what? And in fact, the FSG, John Tanya, I went to a thing in Boston. He was working with a new group called New Profit, I think, and they applied this framework to social enterprise. And they had 5 or 6 case studies, and they showed how to use it. Be kind of cool to think about your work, to say, here's your framework to ABCD. What are your stories that emerge about working with the systems change framework?
Love it.
Great. Go ahead, Angie.
I just had a question about, so in terms of what you just said, Christine, with the ABCD model or format, how does I'm not quite following the mental models part of that. Like, this is a new thing to me, so I just need a little more clarity on that piece.
Sure. So mental models is all about cultural values, cultural beliefs. It's the way that operates. For example, I would say a dominant mental model is the belief that institutions give your needs. So schools give education, you know, the medical systems give health. And so there's this sort of outsourcing of our needs to institutions. That's one dominant mental model, but there's a lot of other mental models that we just used in our society that are unseen. That's why it's, a lot of times this is shown as an iceberg and it's below the water. You can't see it. And oftentimes we don't name it. That's why racism is a mental model too, because we don't see it. But once we can make those things visible, we can start to look at how to shift them and how to shift the cultural beliefs. So like the cultural belief that your neighbor is intrinsic to your happiness and well-being and longevity, you know? There's a lot of studies that have shown that, but do we have that belief? A lot of us might not really care about having strong connections with neighbors.
Perfect. That's awesome explanation. Thank you. I'm with you all now.
Yeah, good example. Awesome, folks. So that nice framework, we'll make sure you get that link with some examples of how it was used for social enterprise. But I think there's a real interesting story here, applying this explicitly to ABCD to make these terms accessible. And to your point, Brandon, talk about real studies to make it even practical for people. Here's just a quick description of the things. I guess we could have talked about those. And again, you know what? This is only one way of doing it. So if you ever want to geek out, Christine, I think you're pretty familiar with system stuff, and probably Heather as well. There's other resources. Oddly enough, one of the authors on here is Peter Senge, and many of you who maybe have read management books in the past remember the Fifth Discipline came out about at least 20 some years ago now, and he's a person who popularized this concept of mental models. It was not his idea. But so there's lots of good stuff here. Here's simply one version of doing it. If we just talk a little bit about the parrots again, the primary focus on the systems change was, I guess this is sort of a little bit, I realized we could expand it. It was focusing on mental models, right? The narrative, this is our parrot, which then created the conditions to go through several iterations of policy change. But they actually, I could have done a better job with the slide, I guess. The only reason they went round one to policy, hit a brick wall, then had to go over here to redo mental models, saying we got to get people given a rip about this parrot. They made success at the mental model levels, and then they had 2 rounds of influence on 2 policy packages. Yeah, this is a multiple line story here. So a clumsy application of that. And so in the workbook, Christine, what's the question you would ask? I'll leave it open to you just to animate the workbook a little bit.
What are the systemic conditions that you have influenced or would like to influence? So at what level are you working? And it's okay if you're working at the structural level, that's where our programs and activities are, but just kind of shining a light and looking at what those are. And then looking at your system, how would you define it? How would you define the actors that are in that system? And then how would you define the interrelationships between those actors? So how does council interrelate with the neighborhood association? And how does the neighborhood association interrelate with the police? And whoever actors you've listed in your system that you're trying to change, how do they all connect with each other?
Yeah, and Christine, in the workbook, do you elaborate those sub-questions like you did just now?
Yeah.
Awesome. Folks, so good questions. These are strategy questions. Let's talk a little bit about how, again, if you're clear about your strategy, it becomes a little bit easier to talk about the methods to track whether you're making a difference. And in the spirit of 1, 2, 3 again, the first one is just count the number of conditions that your deepening community work has influenced or is working on, right? Right, we made some money, we got an investment in a program to do this, we influenced the policy change, we created a citizens coalition to talk to the education system. You're just doing counting, right? By category. Maybe that's the simplest way of talking about level 1. Simply map what you're doing. You're not necessarily getting quality or depth, but at least you're mapping and communicating that you're busy in those areas. So counting by category, if you will. Level 2 is trying to assess the significance of the changes, of the change conditions and your contributions to them. And I'm going to have to beg your forgiveness again because I talked about this technique a lot. Did we talk 2 or 3 sessions ago about most significant change? I don't think we did, eh?
Yeah, last time.
We did last time. That's what I thought.
We did
So,
last time, but you could give a refresher.
yeah, well, it's a great technique. In fact, I was on the phone with the person who developed it last night. Her name is Jess Dart. She's an English. She's from Manchester. No, what's the town where? What's that British soap opera called? Coronation Street. She's from the same place as Coronation Street, but she lives in Melbourne now. These are all needless details, but but I like to listen to her talk. And she developed this technique where you simply you talk about a change and then you talk about why the change was significant and what you contributed to it. Right? So why is it significant that the parent-teacher council is now, I'll give you an example, why it's not a 1-year term, but it's a 2-year term. Actually, I'm going to throw that out. That's a change. I worked here. We had a student council. We were on there for 1 year. Now, why was that not good, a 1-year term? Well, because by the time particularly if you're not used to working in systems, by the time a volunteer gets up to speed about what the hell's going on in a school and know how the system works and starts forming and norming in a group, you have 100% turnover. Right? What you're really doing is saying it's not effective parent council, it's just symbolism. They didn't mean it that way, but that's how it affected. So going to a 2-year changed the power dynamics. We actually had people who understood what was going on, and then we staggered the renewal rate. So half the council left every year, but at least you had some consistency. So a most significant change would say, talk about the significance of moving to a 2-year term and a rolling turnover. Right? So that's number 2. And number 3, if you really wanted to geek out, and this is still my favorite evaluation methodology of the last 3 years, is outcome harvesting. And the way we talked about this entire series of courses using the narrative is kind of like outcome harvesting. What you do is you talk about every little milestone where there might have been a shift in conditions. So Christine, let's play a game where you and I are sitting down and we're saying, well, on October 17th, we went to the school principal and they finally said, okay, we'll consider having a renewed student council. Didn't say yes, but it was a little nuance. November 15th, the school board does this. December 15th, you see how these little cumulative changes happen? They're little subtle changes, but what we do is we map them out over time, almost like a storyboard, Christine and Heather and others that we've been talking about. And there's a structure for doing that even more fully. Now, again, it's level 3, so you wouldn't want to do that all the time. It would be unnecessary. But if you're trying to be nuanced about how you made little changes in order to make a big change, you could turn to outcome harvesting. So again, the policy change here, we could have easily talked about the mental models. If we just talked about the policy change, round 1, counting by categories, we were unsuccessful in round 2, but we actually influenced policy package 2 and number 3. Why was, if we go to level 2, where we talk about significance of these changes, the level 2 package was the first ever Species Protection Act in St. Lucia. And it was unique in that it combined preservation, punishment, and economic incentives. That's why it was significant. And our stakeholders agreed, including the policymakers, that we contributed significantly to that. And level 3 is, here's a month-by-month tracking of all the little wins that we had and all the activities that we contributed to in order to make those changes happen. So we're going into the black box that level 2 doesn't tell you about. Level 2 says what came spinning out of the black box of all your work. Level 3 says, I want to tell you exactly what happened in the black box. So that's, let's just stop there. Maybe open it up again. Christine, I'll ask you to just curate this. Just any reflections on, is this clear, and are the implications of this for evaluation helpful?
Let's just open it up. So we covered 2 topics. We covered systems change and how you might monitor and evaluate that and the system you're working in. And we also talked about shifting awareness. So shifting awareness and will. So either one of those. Maybe someone who hasn't had a chance to chime in yet today wants to jump in.
By the way, Christine, I just got off the phone with Liz and we realized that we have an evaluating systems change workshop at Tamara that's 16 hours long. So we did it in 20 minutes. So it's a lot to absorb. Who thinks they might have a go at this one then around map, just like we did about the mapping awareness and will? Who thinks they might find an application for this both on strategy and evaluation? Maybe just a show of hands. Maybe some hands. We have a real bell curve here. Well, and you know what? To your point earlier, Christine, maybe, and Heather, the question is, to what degree can we make more explicit and visible and useful systems change thinking and language in ABCD? Like maybe it's a good question for us. Maybe we don't naturally go there. It's easy to talk about practical interventions, right? But not the systemic ones. Okay, well, Christine, over to you then about if you want to probe within these last questions, and we can go over the homework or the workbook, I should say.
Yeah, any last questions? We've got 6 minutes left. Any questions from this time, or if you had questions from last time as you began to work through the homework of monitoring your capacity and your context?
I feel like I'm talking a lot. But I confess that I am feeling a little bit lost right now because I missed the last one and I'm trying to catch up, and I thought I knew what I was doing with this and now I have no idea. But I have lots of things to think about. So I'm sorry, but I'm working on it.
Actually, and Angie, one of the things that we took out, because there was two things here, and Christine, you might want to weigh in on this, is we took out in the recap, the confirmation that these are just tools that when you're creating your storyboard of change, right? You may well have some awareness stuff, vignettes. You may well have some systems change stuff that you want to plot on a story. So what are the different frameworks and tools you could use if and when you legitimately have an awareness change or a systems change? So the purpose is, this is meant to help with your storyboarding of an impact report. Christine, is that correct?
Yeah, definitely. And I think we were covering a lot of concepts. I don't think you're alone in feeling lost, Angie. I think a lot of us are feeling lost. It's a lot of different frameworks, a lot of different theories, and they're all just different ways to slice the same pie and tell the same story, right? So it's not about using all of them. It's about seeing what's a tool that will help you think about your work differently and tell your story in a way that's compelling, that brings the narrative and the numbers together in a way that shows your impact. So I think when Lisa talks in module 6 around how to communicate your impact, you'll start to have some sort of ahas around maybe which of these tools will help as you put together your own impact report. And we've put a little folder together that I'll even just send out the link to you with the workbook this time, just so you have a couple of months to look at them. But they're just great. They're just examples of how people have told their story and demonstrated the impact, even if it's just those small changes that Mark talked about that add up to some big shifts. Heather, anything to add? No.
I want to thank Angie, because that's how I'm feeling exactly, Angie. And I did miss the last one as well. Started to watch it, but I really just haven't had time. So I was hoping I would be able to follow this perfectly well, but I haven't. But that explanation is super helpful.
Good. Well, I think, Christine, we're at time. So what we'll do is we'll just confirm we got some follow-up stuff and embrace the idea that we're just incrementally tackling one little piece of this narrative report building format at a time. And our next session is on talking about niche innovations and can we grow them? You know, practical, basic practical programs and activities.
And I want to throw out there too that Christine and I are here to help you through this. So, you know, when you're doing this work, you're never doing it alone. And so we may not have the answers, but we also have Mark with us right now. So if you've got any answers from what you've heard from Mark, we got to get it all done and be able to go back to Mark before the last one when we lose them. So please bring your questions, and we'll sit down and help you through it.
Mm-hmm.
That's good. We really are zooming out on narrative and zooming in on specific, zooming out on narrative, zooming in on specific. So the zooming in is where it gets lost, but the zooming out is how the hell to tell a story that makes your results explicit. And acknowledging, again, remember when people don't understand how something is created, they get really reductionist, particularly in Western culture, and say, just show me bottom line impact. Right? Like it's almost like a safety valve. It's like I'm swimming in the ocean. Just give me an impact number. We're saying, no, no, no. We're going to tell you no narratives without numbers, no numbers without stories. We're going to tell you a story about how multiple results have contributed to impact over time. That's what we're trying to do. So the geeky stuff is the zooming in like we did today, but the zooming out stuff is more the stuff that I think we're naturally able to do anyways. We're just scaffolding ourselves to be able to do it better. Great. Well, Christine,
Great.
Heather, thank you.
All right.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.